The clinking of silverware against porcelain usually filled our evenings with a comfortable melody. Tonight, however, the sound felt sharp, each ping an accusation in the suffocating silence. We sat across from each other at our usual spots, the aroma of roasted chicken doing little to warm the cold air between us. Amanda picked at her food, her gaze drifting anywhere but towards me. It wasn't just the lack of conversation, it was the way she moved, the almost frantic energy that vibrated beneath her forced calm. It had started subtly, like a change in the weather you barely notice until you realize you're shivering. Late nights at the office became a regular thing, explained away with deadlines and demanding clients. Then came the perfume, something new, floral and sharp, replacing her usual soft vanilla. I remember the first time I noticed it, a jolt, like a wrong note in a familiar song. She'd brushed past me in the hallway, leaving a trail of that unfamiliar scent, and I'd stopped, inhaling deeply, a knot tightening in my stomach. Tonight, it was the phone. It vibrated on the granite countertop, a silent, insistent buzz during dinner. She flinched, her hand darting out to silence it like it was a venomous insect. "Just work," she mumbled, not meeting my eyes, and shoved the device face down. My heart hammered against my ribs. Work never called at this hour. Work never made her jump like that. Later, after a strained attempt at watching television, a nature documentary neither of us was actually seeing, she announced she was going to shower. The bathroom door clicked shut, and the sound of rushing water filled the apartment, a temporary barrier between us. I cleared the table mechanically, my mind racing, replaying every subtle shift, every evasive glance from the past few weeks. It was like piecing together a fractured mirror, each shard reflecting a distorted image of our life. A memory flickered, Amanda, years ago, laughing as we hiked up a mountain trail, her hand warm in mine, the sun turning her hair to spun gold. We were invincible then, a team, our laughter echoing through the trees. Now, the laughter was gone, replaced by this heavy, unspoken tension. The warmth in her hand had vanished, replaced by a cool, polite distance. The shower shut off. I heard the faint rustle of the curtain being drawn back. My gaze drifted to the clothes she'd discarded on the bedroom chair. Her dress lay in a soft heap, the new perfume faintly clinging to the fabric. And then I saw it, or rather, didn't see it. No delicate lace peeking from beneath the fabric, no shadow of familiar straps. Just skin, then dress. A cold dread washed over me. It was such a small thing, almost insignificant, but it screamed volumes in the sudden silence of my mind. It was a detail out of place, a thread pulled loose that threatened to unravel the entire fabric of our life. My feet moved before I consciously decided to. Her phone lay innocently on the nightstand, its screen dark. I knew I shouldn't. Privacy, trust, all the sacred vows of marriage echoed in my head, hollow and mocking. But the knot in my stomach was tightening, the suspicion a living thing now, clawing its way up my throat. My fingers trembled as I picked it up. It wasn't locked. A childish relief washed over me, quickly replaced by a deeper, more sickening anxiety. I swiped, and the screen illuminated, revealing a cascade of notifications. My eyes skipped over the usual app icons, landing on a messaging app one didn't recognize. A name flashed at the top of the list. Peter. My breath hitched. I tapped it. The messages were casual. Too casual. Emojis, inside jokes I didn't understand, late-night exchanges about dinners, drinks, laughing until my sides hurt. Each line was a tiny pinprick, deflating the fragile hope I'd been clinging to. Then I scrolled further up. A message from earlier that day, time-stamped just before she'd left for work. Can't wait to see you later. My blood ran cold. The winking emoji, so flirty, so intimate, felt like a physical blow. I stared at the message, the screen blurring through the sudden sting of tears in my eyes. My hands went numb. This wasn't just late nights at work. This wasn't just a new perfume. This was something else. Something deliberate. Something hidden. Amanda emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, steam clinging to her skin and hair. She looked up, and her eyes met mine. For a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a flicker of guilt, a shadow of something dark in their depths. Then it was gone, replaced by a carefully constructed mask of polite inquiry. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice too bright, too casual. I held up the phone, the screen still illuminated with the damning message. My voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. "Peter!" The color drained from her face. The towel slipped slightly on her shoulder, but she didn't seem to notice. Her eyes widened, a trapped animal caught in headlights. For a long, agonizing moment, she just stared at me, speechless. Then, a single word escaped her lips, barely audible. "Okay," she breathed, her voice trembling. "Okay, fine. Yes." The confession wasn't a dramatic outburst, not a tearful plea for forgiveness. It was a quiet surrender, a deflated admission of guilt that hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. The single word shattered everything. The clinking silverware, the shared dinners, the mountain hikes, the laughter. All of it, suddenly, felt like a lie. The routine of our married life, the comfortable melody, had been masking a discordant, heartbreaking truth. And in that moment, standing there in the steam-filled bedroom, I knew our song had changed forever. "Yes," she repeated, the word hanging between us like a death sentence. The air in the room thickened, each breath a painful reminder of the life we had built, now collapsing around us. My anger, simmering beneath the surface, finally erupted. "Yes. That's it. Just yes." My voice was raw, unfamiliar even to my own ears. I wanted to scream, to shatter every fragile thing in the apartment, but all that came out was a choked whisper of disbelief. She flinched, taking a step back as if physically recoiling from my pain. "What do you want me to say?" she asked, her voice laced with a strange mix of defiance and exhaustion. "You found out." "Yes, it's true." "True," I echoed, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "True that you've been lying to my face for weeks? True that you've been with someone else?" The word cheating felt too clinical, too clean for the messy, visceral betrayal that was tearing through me. "Don't make it sound so dramatic," she snapped, a flicker of her old sharpness returning. "It's not like that." "Not like what, Amanda? Not like you've completely shattered everything we have?" The memory of her dress on the chair, the absence of underwear beneath it, flashed in my mind. "Were you even wearing any when you went out with him? Or did you just expect to?" The question hung unfinished, too vulgar, too raw to voice completely. Her eyes widened, a blush creeping up her neck. That's none of your business," she stammered, finally looking away. That was it. The final, brutal confirmation. Something inside me snapped. "Get out," I said, the words cold and precise, each syllable a shard of ice. "Just get out." She stared at me, disbelief warring with a dawning understanding in her eyes. "Tonight. Where am I supposed to go?" "I don't care," I said, my voice devoid of emotion now, flat and dead. "Just go." I can't look at you right now." The argument that followed was a blur of raised voices, accusations hurled like stones, and tears. Mostly hers, though my own eyes burned with unshed grief. She packed a bag, her movements jerky and angry, grabbing clothes from the closet, toiletries from the bathroom, the sounds echoing in the suddenly cavernous apartment. I watched her, numb, my heart a leaden weight in my chest. She didn't argue, didn't beg for forgiveness, just moved with a furious, wounded pride. When she finally slammed the door behind her, the silence that descended was deafening, broken only by the frantic pounding of my own heart. The next few days were a fog of pain and anger. Sleep offered no escape, just a relentless replay of her confession, her evasiveness, the casual cruelty of that winking emoji. I found myself staring at her side of the bed, the empty space a gaping wound in our once shared life. The silence in the apartment was oppressive, punctuated only by the insistent buzzing of my own thoughts. Driven by a desperate need for answers, for some semblance of control in this chaos, the idea took root. A spy app. It felt dirty, invasive, a betrayal of everything I believed in. But the alternative, living in this agonizing uncertainty, haunted by unanswered questions, was unbearable. Was I sinking to her level? Maybe. But I had to know. Had to understand the depth of the deception. The installation was quick, disturbingly easy. And then, the waiting. The first messages trickled in, mundane at first, grocery lists, work emails, vapid exchanges with her friends. Then, the conversations with Peter started to appear, stark and undeniable in their intimacy. Dinner dates, stolen afternoons, whispered phone calls. It had been going on for months, a secret life lived in the shadows of our marriage. But it wasn't just the affair itself that twisted the knife. It was the casual cruelty in her messages to her friends, the dismissive way she spoke about me, about our life together. "He's so clueless," she'd written to one of them. "It's almost pathetic." Pathetic. The word echoed in my mind, a brutal assessment of everything I thought I was, everything I thought we had. Her conversations with her friend, Chloe, were particularly galling. Chloe, who I'd always thought was supportive, understanding. Instead, she was a viper, whispering encouragement, fueling Amanda's resentment. "You deserve to be happy," Chloe had texted. "If he can't give you what you need." What I couldn't give her. My loyalty. My love. My entire life. Then came the messages about Peter. His name was Peter Olson, apparently a colleague from work. The messages painted a picture of stolen moments, hurried lunches, late-night texts filled with longing and promises. "Thinking of you," he'd written. "Can't wait until Friday." Friday. That was tonight. My stomach clenched. Where were they meeting? Driven by a sudden reckless impulse, I checked her location data, another feature of the app that felt like a violation, yet I couldn't stop myself. A motel. The Moonlight Motel, a cheap, run-down place on the outskirts of town. My breath hitched. Friday night. A motel. It all clicked into place, a sickening, undeniable picture of betrayal. Rage, cold and sharp, replaced the despair. This wasn't just some emotional affair, some harmless flirtation as she'd initially tried to imply. This was calculated, deliberate, and deeply disrespectful. I had to see it. Had to confront her. Had to rip away the carefully constructed lies and expose the ugly truth. The drive to the motel was a blur of fury and disbelief. My hands clenched the steering wheel, knuckles white, jaw tight. I parked a discreet distance away, heart hammering against my ribs, and walked towards the dimly lit motel, each step fueled by a burning need for confrontation. Room 305. The number swam into focus as I reached the second floor. Light spilled from beneath the door, casting a thin, yellow line onto the dingy carpet. I could hear muffled voices, Amanda's voice, low and intimate, intertwined with a deeper, unfamiliar murmur. My hand trembled as I raised it to knock, then hesitated. No. Knocking was too polite, too civilized for what she'd done. I kicked the door open. The flimsy wood splintered around the lock, the sudden crash echoing through the motel hallway. The scene inside was frozen, a tableau of guilt and shock. Amanda stood by the bed, half-dressed, her face pale, eyes wide with terror. Peter Olson, a man I vaguely recognized from office parties, stood beside her, equally stunned, his shirt unbuttoned, a half-empty bottle of wine on the nightstand. But there was someone else in the room. A woman, standing near the window, her back to me, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She turned slowly as the door crashed open, and I recognized her instantly. Peter Olson's wife. Her face was tear-streaked, mascara running down her cheeks, her eyes red and swollen with grief. She'd been here already, a silent witness to their betrayal. Amanda gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Peter stared, his face a mask of panicked disbelief. The air crackled with tension, thick with shame and recrimination. No words were needed. The The scene spoke volumes, a brutal, undeniable exposure of their deceit. Amanda's face crumpled, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw a flicker of something that might have been shame in her eyes. Later that week, the call came from my father. "Christmas is at our place this year," he said, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "And Amanda isn't welcome." It was a small thing, a family gathering months away, but it felt like a line drawn in the sand. My family, my solid, unwavering family, had closed ranks around me, their message clear. Amanda was out. Rejected. An outcast. I didn't tell Amanda about the call. Didn't feel the need to. She was living in a small, sterile apartment now, a world away from our shared life. I imagined her there, alone, perhaps finally facing the consequences of her choices. Did she feel rejected? Did she care? Or had she already moved on, her heart already fully invested in Peter Olson and their stolen moments? I didn't know. And in that moment, staring out at the city lights from my living room window, the silence in the apartment heavier than ever, I realized I wasn't sure I even wanted to know. The exposure had happened, the truth was out, but the pieces of my shattered life still lay scattered at my feet, and the path forward remained shrouded in a painful, uncertain fog. The first lifeline thrown to me in the churning sea of my despair was a dinner invitation. Peter, my oldest friend, appeared on my doorstep that Saturday, a foil-covered casserole dish in hand and a grin set to his jaw. "Lasagna," he announced, pushing past me into the apartment. "And no arguing. You're eating something other than takeout tonight." It was a small gesture, almost absurdly domestic in the face of the emotional wreckage I was navigating, but it was exactly what I needed. That night, and in the weeks that followed, my friends and family became my anchors. Dinners at my sister's house, filled with the comforting chaos of her kids and the steady presence of my brother-in-law. Late-night phone calls with my mother, her voice soft but firm, reminding me of my strength, even when I felt like I was crumbling. My father, gruff and practical, simply showed up one day with a list of divorce lawyers he'd vetted. No questions asked, just quiet, unwavering support. It was my colleague, Peter, though, who suggested therapy. Peter, a man I'd always admired for his calm demeanor and quiet wisdom, had seen me spiraling at work. The missed deadlines, the blank stares, the barely concealed rage simmering beneath my professional facade. "You're going through hell, man," he'd said one afternoon, closing my office door behind him. "It's okay to ask for help. In fact, it's the smartest thing you can do." He gave me the number of a therapist he'd seen years ago, a woman named Dr. Davis, and urged me to call. Dr. Davis's office was a haven of calm, all soft lighting and muted colors, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. In our sessions, she didn't offer easy answers or quick fixes. Instead, she listened, patiently, as I poured out the story of Amanda's betrayal, the motel room, the messages, the crushing weight of it all. She asked questions that peeled back the layers of my anger and hurt, forcing me to confront the raw, vulnerable emotions beneath. "What are you feeling right now, Joseph?" she'd ask, her voice gentle but insistent. And slowly, painstakingly, I began to unravel the tangled threads of my pain. The shock, the humiliation, the profound sense of loss, not just of Amanda, but of the future we'd planned, the life I thought we had. The first meeting with the lawyer, Ms. Brown, was a stark plunge into the cold, practical realities of divorce. Her office was all sharp angles and legal files, a world away from Dr. Davis's comforting space. Ms. Brown was efficient, no nonsense, her questions precise and focused on the legal landscape ahead. Custody, assets, division of property. The words felt alien, clinical, dissecting the messy, emotional core of my shattered marriage into legal jargon. She advised me on my rights, outlined potential strategies, her tone professional but not unsympathetic. "This is going to be difficult, Mr. Wilson," she'd said, her gaze direct. "But we'll navigate it together. We'll protect your interests." Her words were reassuring, a promise of structure and control in a world that felt utterly chaotic. Then came the test results. The doctor's voice on the phone was calm, almost detached, as he delivered the news. "Chlamydia. Mr. Wilson. We need to start treatment immediately. The word hit me like a physical blow, stealing my breath. Chlamydia. Disgust and rage, hot and corrosive, flooded through me. It wasn't just the betrayal, the lies, the emotional devastation. It was this violation of my body, this careless disregard for my health, this final, sickening proof of her recklessness. I slammed the phone down, the sound echoing the shattering of something else within me, some last vestige of respect, of something for the woman I thought I knew. In the therapy session that followed, the unpleasant medical news became a focal point. Dr. Davis listened patiently as I raged, as I wept, as I wrestled with the full, horrifying scope of Amanda's betrayal. "This is about more than just infidelity now, isn't it, Joseph?" she asked gently. "This is about respect, about trust, about your very well-being." And she was right. The STI wasn't just a physical ailment. It was a symbol, a tangible manifestation of the utter disregard Amanda had shown for me, for our marriage, for everything we were supposed to share. The thought of Amanda having any influence over my life, over my future, became unbearable. If she could be so careless, so deceitful, so destructive, what else was she capable of? The idea of sharing custody, of allowing her to have equal say in raising our children who, in my pain, I now desperately wished I had, a family to fight for, to protect, filled me with a cold dread. I couldn't let her near them. Couldn't risk her inflicting this kind of damage on innocent lives. The decision solidified in my mind, stark and unwavering. I would fight for full custody. It wasn't about revenge. It was about protection. It was about ensuring that whatever future lay ahead, it would be safe, stable, and free from the poison of her betrayal. Ms. Brown listened carefully as I laid out my intentions, her expression thoughtful. "Custody battles can be challenging," she cautioned, "but we will explore all avenues. We will build a strong case." Then came the video calls. Amanda initiated them, her face pale and drawn on the screen, her voice a strained tremor. At first, they were stilted, awkward exchanges, filled with forced pleasantries and veiled accusations. But then, the provocations began. Tearful pleas for forgiveness, desperate attempts to guilt-trip me, veiled threats about making the divorce ugly if I didn't cooperate. She'd mention Peter, sometimes with a defiant pride, sometimes with a calculated vulnerability, as if testing my reactions, trying to find a crack in my resolve. During one call, she even angled the camera to subtly show him in the background, a casual arm draped around her shoulder, a deliberate, cruel display of their continued intimacy. I tried to remain calm, detached, remembering Dr. Davis's advice about not engaging with her emotional manipulations. But each call was a fresh wound, a reminder of the woman I'd loved, now weaponizing our shared past against me. Meanwhile, the spy app continued to feed me a steady stream of information, a toxic drip of her private world. Her conversations with Chloe were particularly disturbing. Chloe's advice was consistently reckless, self-serving, and devoid of any genuine remorse. "Just deny everything," Chloe texted once. "He has no real proof. Make him look like the crazy, jealous ex." Another time, "Play the victim. Men eat that stuff up. Say you were lonely, unappreciated. Make him feel guilty." Amanda, in her responses, wavered between defiance and doubt. Sometimes she seemed to embrace Chloe's manipulative tactics. Other times, a flicker of hesitation, a hint of unease would surface. "Is this really the right thing to do?" she'd texted once, late at night. Chloe's response was immediate, dismissive. "Don't be weak. You deserve to be happy. He's just trying to control you." The manipulative friend, the toxic advice, the escalating conflict, the looming legal battles, a consequence of the betrayal. It all felt like a relentless barrage, a coordinated attack on my sanity. I felt myself teetering on the edge, exhaustion and anger warring within me. Then, one evening, Peter stopped by again, not with lasagna this time, but with a bottle of aged whiskey and a calm, steady gaze. We sat on my balcony, the city lights twinkling below, and I poured out my frustrations, my fears, my overwhelming sense of being adrift. Peter listened, as always, patiently, and then he offered a simple piece of advice, a lifeline in the storm. "Joseph," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "you can't control what Amanda does, or what her friends say. You can only control how you react. Focus on yourself. Focus on healing. Focus on building your future, brick by brick, without her. Let her drama play out in its own pathetic little theater. You have bigger things to worry about now, like getting your life back." His words were like a bomb, a reminder that amidst the chaos and betrayal, I still had agency, still had the power to choose my own path forward. And in that moment, looking out at the city lights, a fragile seed of resolve began to take root. The road ahead was still long and uncertain, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, I could navigate this storm and emerge, battered but not broken, on the other side. The silence in the apartment had become a living entity, a suffocating blanket that smothered every corner of my life. Despair was a constant companion now, a dull ache that throbbed behind my eyes and settled heavy in my chest. Anger flared sporadically, hot and sharp, but it always retreated, leaving behind a deeper, more pervasive sense of emptiness. Food tasted like ash, sleep was a battlefield of fragmented nightmares, and even the simplest tasks felt monumental. I was adrift, lost in a fog of my own making, the wreckage of my marriage swirling around me like debris after a storm. One morning, staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, the hollow eyes, the gaunt cheeks, the lines etched deeper around my mouth, the full weight of it crashed down on me. It was over. Irrevocably, completely, utterly over. Amanda, the woman I had built a life with, shared dreams with, whispered secrets to in the dark, was gone. Not just gone from my bed, from my apartment, but gone from my life, replaced by a stranger, a hostile adversary I barely recognized. Memories flickered, sharp and painful. Amanda's smile, bright as sunshine, the way she used to crinkle her nose when she laughed, the quiet evenings spent curled up on the sofa, reading side by side. These weren't just memories of a past relationship. They were fragments of my identity, pieces of myself that had been ripped away, leaving raw, gaping wounds. I traced the lines on my face, the physical manifestation of this emotional trauma, and a bitter laugh escaped my lips. This was it. This was the new normal. A life defined by loss, by betrayal, by the ghost of what once was. The restraining order arrived a few days later, a crisp legal document delivered with cold efficiency. It was Ms. Brown's doing, a preemptive measure she'd insisted on after hearing about Amanda's increasingly erratic behavior and Chloe's escalatingly aggressive messages. Initially, I'd resisted, feeling like it was an overreaction, another escalation in a conflict I desperately wanted to end. But Ms. Brown had been firm. "It's a precaution, Joseph," she'd explained, "and sometimes precautions are necessary." Holding the document in my hands, the stark legal language a chilling testament to the chasm that had opened between Amanda and me, a strange sense of relief washed over me, quickly followed by a deeper, colder wave of finality. This wasn't just a separation, it was a legal barricade, a formal declaration of war. The relief was fleeting, overshadowed by the crushing weight of what it signified, the absolute, undeniable end. The meeting with Amanda and her lawyer was scheduled at Ms. Brown's office. The atmosphere in the room was thick with tension, a palpable hostility hanging in the air. Amanda arrived with Chloe in tow, Chloe radiating a smug, almost predatory confidence, while Amanda herself was a study in nervous energy, her eyes darting around the room, avoiding mine. She was dressed in clothes I didn't recognize, sharper, more aggressive styles, as if trying on a new persona, shedding the remnants of the woman I knew. Chloe took the lead, her voice sharp and accusatory from the moment they sat down. "We're here to finalize this quickly," she announced, her gaze fixed on Ms. Brown. "Amanda wants this over and done with." Amanda remained silent, her fingers fidgeting with her purse, her gaze fixed on the polished surface of the conference table. "Ms. Davis," Ms. Brown began, her voice calm and professional, "we've reviewed your counter-proposal, and frankly, it's unrealistic." She proceeded to calmly dismantle Amanda's demands, outlining the legal precedents, the financial realities, her tone measured but firm. Chloe interrupted constantly, her objections shrill and illogical, her arguments veering into personal attacks against me, fueled by a barely concealed venom. Amanda remained mostly silent, occasionally chiming in with a petulant complaint or a dismissive shrug. Then came the strange behavior. It started subtly, with Amanda interrupting Ms. Brown to ask about the thermostat, complaining that the room was too cold, then too hot, then too drafty, her requests increasingly bizarre and disconnected from the conversation. She started playing with her hair, twisting strands around her fingers, pulling at them absently, her gaze unfocused. Then, she began to hum, a tuneless, repetitive little melody that grated on my nerves. Chloe tried to steer her back to the discussion, snapping at her impatiently, but Amanda seemed oblivious, lost in her own internal world. She started making faces, pulling exaggerated expressions, rolling her eyes dramatically at points Ms. Brown made, as if performing for an invisible audience. At one point she leaned across the table, her voice suddenly loud and conspiratorial, and whispered to me, "He never really loved you, you know, Peter. He just pities you." The non sequitur hung in the air, baffling and unsettling. The meeting descended into a surreal farce. Chloe continued to argue, her face flushed with anger, while Amanda drifted further and further into her own strange performance, her behavior oscillating between childish petulance and unsettling detachment. It was as if she was deliberately sabotaging the proceedings, or perhaps, genuinely incapable of engaging with the gravity of the situation. Finally, Ms. Brown, with remarkable patience, managed to steer the conversation towards the final divorce agreement, the one we had proposed, the one Amanda's lawyer had initially vehemently rejected. To everyone's surprise, Amanda suddenly agreed. "Fine," she said abruptly, interrupting Chloe mid-rant. "Whatever. Just give it to me. I'll sign." Chloe sputtered in protest, her face contorted with disbelief. "Amanda, what are you doing? We haven't even—" But Amanda cut her off with a sharp wave of her hand. I want it to be over," she mumbled, her gaze still unfocused. Ms. Brown, ever professional, slid the document across the table. Amanda picked it up, glanced at the cover page, and without reading a single word, scribbled her signature on the designated lines. She pushed the document back across the table, stood abruptly, and walked towards the door, Chloe scrambling to follow, still protesting, her voice fading as they disappeared into the hallway. Ms. Brown and I stared at each other in stunned silence. She picked up the signed agreement, her expression a mixture of disbelief and concern. "Well," she said slowly, shaking her head, "that was unexpected." She reviewed the signature, then looked up at me, her eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Mr. Wilson," she said, her voice quiet, "are you concerned about Mrs. Wilson's well-being?" Her question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Concerned? Yes. Terrified might be a more accurate word. Amanda's behavior in that meeting, the erratic shifts, the unsettling detachment, the whispered non sequitur, it wasn't just strange, it felt unhinged. And Chloe, with her venomous pronouncements and manipulative tactics, seemed to be fueling something dark and unpredictable. A cold dread settled in my stomach, a sense that this wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the beginning of something else, something potentially more dangerous, more sinister than I could have ever imagined. The divorce agreement was signed, legally binding, but the storm, I realized with a chilling certainty, was far from over. It was simply morphing, shifting into a new, more menacing form, and I had a terrifying premonition that I was still very much in its path. The courtroom air was thick with anticipation, a suffocating blend of legal formality and raw emotion. The judge's voice, when it came, was clear and decisive, cutting through the tension like a knife. The court finds in favor of the petitioner, Mr. Wilson. Divorce granted. Sole custody of any minor children, should they exist in the future, is awarded to Mr. Wilson. The words echoed in the sudden silence, a pronouncement that severed the last legal ties to Amanda, to the wreckage of our marriage. Victory. Yes, technically. Legally. But as I sat there, the weight of it settled upon me, heavy and cold, devoid of any true triumph. Emptiness was the dominant feeling, a vast, hollow ache where relief should have been. Amanda, seated across the aisle with her lawyer, remained impassive, her face a carefully constructed mask of indifference. Chloe, however, was a study in barely contained fury, her eyes narrowed slits, her lips pressed into a thin white line. There was no appeal, no outburst, just a chilling silence as they left the courtroom, leaving me alone with a hollow echo of my win. The fragile peace that followed was shattered a week later by the insistent pounding on my front door. 2 uniformed police officers stood on my doorstep, their expressions neutral, their presence radiating an unsettling authority. "Police search warrant, Mr. Wilson," the taller officer stated, his voice devoid of emotion, producing a document for my inspection. "We need to search your residence." My mind raced, a frantic scramble to understand. Search warrant? For what? Had Amanda, Chloe? The apartment was turned upside down, every drawer emptied, every cupboard ransacked, the sterile order of my newly rebuilt life violated with brutal efficiency. They were looking for something specific, but wouldn't say what, their silence amplifying the growing knot of anxiety in my stomach. Hours later, they left as abruptly as they'd arrived, taking with them a box of documents and my already frayed nerves, leaving behind a chaotic mess and a chilling sense of unease. The official explanation was vague, part of an ongoing investigation. Investigation into what? Into whom? The questions hung in the air, unanswered, ominous. The news of the accident arrived in a garbled phone call from the hospital. Amanda, Chloe, Peter, all 3, in a single car, late at night, on a deserted stretch of highway. Drunk driving, the police report later stated. Chloe behind the wheel, Amanda and Peter passengers. The car, a mangled wreck of twisted metal and shattered glass, lay in a ditch, a grotesque tableau of recklessness and ruin. Chloe, critically injured, clinging to life. Peter, unconscious, serious but stable. Amanda was gone. Killed instantly on impact. The news hit me with a delayed, disorienting force. Numbness first, a cold, detached disbelief. Then, a slow, creeping wave of nausea, followed by a sharp, unexpected pang of grief. Not for the stranger Amanda had become, but for the ghost of the woman I had loved, the woman who was now irrevocably lost, not just to me, but to the world. The tragic irony of it all, the senseless waste, the brutal finality, it was almost unbearable. My friends and family rallied around me again, their support a warm, solid presence in the face of this new wave of chaos. Peter arrived within hours, their sleeves rolled up, ready to help clean up the apartment, to restore some semblance of order to the wreckage left by the police search, and now, by this latest tragedy. My sister organized meals, my parents offered quiet, unwavering presence, their silent support speaking volumes. Their practical help, their quiet empathy, was a lifeline, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, I was not alone. In the aftermath of the accident, the fate of Chloe's children became a stark, secondary tragedy. Chloe's ex-husband, a quiet, decent man I'd met briefly at a school event years ago, stepped forward, taking on the responsibility for her 2 young children, adding to the already heavy burden on his shoulders. He became a single father overnight, inheriting the chaotic aftermath of Chloe's destructive choices, a silent testament to the far-reaching consequences of her recklessness. A week after Amanda's funeral, a bleak, sparsely attended affair, her parents called, asking to meet. Their faces were etched with grief, their eyes red-rimmed and hollow. They didn't blame me, didn't offer excuses for Amanda's behavior. Instead, they spoke of a daughter I barely recognized, a woman plagued by insecurities, driven by a desperate need for validation, a woman who had lost her way long before she met Peter Olson, long before our marriage began to unravel. They confessed their own failings as parents, their inability to truly understand or help her, their voices choked with remorse and a profound, heartbreaking love for the daughter they had lost. They revealed fragments of Amanda's past, vulnerabilities and hidden wounds I had never glimpsed, painting a more complex, more tragic picture of the woman she had become. Then came the story of Chloe and the beating. It emerged in hushed whispers from mutual acquaintances, a brutal, almost unbelievable coda to the tragedy. Apparently, in the chaotic aftermath of the accident, fueled by grief and recrimination, Chloe's other friends, a volatile, toxic group, had turned on Amanda. Accusations flew, blame was assigned, and in a horrific, drunken rage, they had physically attacked her, leaving her bruised, broken, and exiled from their already fractured circle. Where she went after that, no one seemed to know. She vanished, swallowed by the city, another casualty of her own destructive choices and the toxic relationships she had cultivated. The call about Amanda's suicide attempt came late one night. Amanda's father's voice strained and desperate on the other end of the line. She had been found in her apartment, unresponsive, an empty bottle of pills beside her bed. He had found her just in time, rushed her to the hospital, her life hanging precariously in the balance. He was distraught, overwhelmed, his voice cracking with a mixture of grief and exhaustion. Later, after the immediate crisis had passed, I called Amanda's father back. He was weary, his voice heavy with the weight of his daughter's self-destruction, but also laced with a quiet, enduring love. He spoke of the mounting medical bills, the long road to recovery ahead, the uncertain future. Without thinking, without hesitation, I offered to help, to contribute financially to Amanda's treatment, to ease some of the burden on her parents. It wasn't about forgiveness, not about reconciliation. It was about compassion. A flicker of humanity in the face of so much tragedy, a recognition of shared loss, a gesture of empathy for the broken family left behind. Months later, I moved. A smaller apartment, in a different part of the city, a clean break from the ghosts of the past. Boxes were unpacked, walls were painted a calming, neutral color, new furniture arrived, piece by piece, filling the empty spaces. Life slowly began to rebuild itself, brick by brick, as Peter had advised. Work became a focus again, friends and family a constant source of support, therapy a continuing process of healing and self-discovery. The future remained uncertain, a landscape still shrouded in shadows, but not without glimmers of light. Dating felt like a distant, almost alien concept, but the crushing weight of despair had begun to lift, replaced by a fragile sense of possibility. The lessons learned were etched deep, painful but invaluable. Trust was a precious, fragile thing, easily shattered. Betrayal left scars that might never fully fade. But resilience was also real, a quiet strength that could emerge from the deepest pain. And life, in its relentless, unpredictable way, went on. The song had changed, yes, irrevocably altered by loss and heartbreak, but perhaps, just perhaps, a new melody was beginning to emerge, faint and hesitant, but carrying within it the quiet promise of a different kind of future, a future built not on the ashes of the past, but on the hard-won wisdom of survival.